Building Horror is a Fearzine podcast where we talk to folks in the gaming industry who have a passion for horror games and are developers, artists, creators, or just passionate enthusiasts. I'm your host, Dan Morris, head of and editor-in-chief of Fearzine, and joining me today is Kip. Welcome, Kip.
Hey, welcome. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate you having me here.
Thank you, sir, for joining us and being a part of the show. I'm really excited to be kicking off this series and getting to talk to developers. And I'm thrilled that I could have you be my first guest.
Yeah, thank you. That's awesome. That's really exciting. Yeah, just look at myself as just a dude that likes to make video games. So that's really cool to be chatting with you and chatting with your community. So yeah, really appreciate it. As you mentioned, for myself, I was the developer of Conrad Stevenson's Paranormal PI. Guess a little bit about me with it. I enjoy paranormal, enjoy video games. It's kind of weird because I think the games I enjoy most are probably like Soulsborne type games, and I don't play a lot of horror games. But I was, kind of just have an itch to play the horror games. And when I was looking, just and my love for the paranormal, my love for ghost hunters, ghost adventures, and all that. I want, play a game that was similar to that. And for me, I just was struggling to find a game like that. So that's what kind of sent me on the journey to develop Conrad Stevenson's Paranormal PI. And I think the uniqueness and stuff of the gameplay probably has a lot to do with just my inexperience in the field of playing a lot of those other games that are similar to it. It turned out to be seems like the players like it, reviewed pretty well, which is kind of mind blowing to me, very humbling that a first game that folks appreciated that much. And really it just kind of was developed out of me trying to make a game that emulated my enjoyment and love the paranormal and those ghost hunter, ghost adventures type TV shows that I saw, just to play a game that gave me an experience like I was watching those shows. So
Very cool. I gotta go back now here, thinking like with the way you introduce yourself about like a guy who just the dude that wants to make horror games, and I'm like, I'm a dude that makes a horror game magazine. So that's what brings us all together here is our love for games and horror, the genre within that. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned that your typical genre is like the Soulsborne. So I wanted to follow up on that a little bit. So what are some of your favorite like Souls likes?
Yeah, so this might be a everyone's favorite right now, but I really just fell in love with Elden Ring when it came out. I have like 1,000 hours in Elden Ring, which is kind of a lot. But I've been playing them since Demon Souls, like
OG.
Demon Souls. I have 100% achievements on that. Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 3, Sekiro, Bloodborne. So I mean, I've played them all. Dark Souls 2, I guess maybe I'm a little bit in the fan thing. I'm not a huge fan of that, and I didn't get all the achievements on that. And I don't know, but yeah, I think Elden Ring is pretty epic to me. Outside of that, I really like Sekiro. I think the reason why I like that so much is not only the dynamic swordplay and the aggressiveness of it, but there's also like an audio portion of that where that I thought it was a really unique experience, like when you're swinging your swords and you're clanging your swords, you really listen to the sound, and there was like almost like a rhythmic beat with the battles on it, and I just enjoyed that aggressive kind of rhythmic, the fights of the bosses, and that was a pretty epic yet challenging game for sure. So
Yeah, I can see what you're saying, and I agree with you on Sekiro about the rhythmic sense of it and the how much the audio plays into the combat, especially when you get like the parry with the counterattack, and there's those really intense and dynamic sound effects that go along with it. And it's funny that you mentioned Sekiro too, because that's one of those games that like I was really excited for, and then when it came out, I hit a wall with it because I was struggling to understand the mechanics. But like all of the FromSoft Souls likes, there's usually like a specific thing that once it clicks, you kind of get it, and it helps make the game make sense better. And for me, that was the parrying. I didn't get the parrying the first time I played that game. And interestingly enough, I actually revisited Sekiro recently because I played a different game that had a parrying mechanic that made me think, "Oh, this reminds me of Sekiro." And I went back to Sekiro and I was like, "Oh, I get it now." Like it started
Yeah.
clicking for me, like how to do the parrying and how to time it better and how to focus on that in the combat. But
Mhm.
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's definitely a few layers of uh like eye-opening experiences with that game. Yeah, I think
Mm,
the first boss battle, General on the horse there, like get stonewalled by him pretty hard until you kind of figure out some of those gameplays. And then I think the audio thing really started clicking with me. I saw some YouTuber like beat some bosses blindfolded, which was just like astonishing to me. It's like, how in the world would they do that? But then it kind of got me started thinking, it's like there has to be some kind of audio element to this to where they can do it blindfolded. And then once I kind of started discovering the nuances of, the bosses and the sounds and when the swords would clink, then like a new level of clouds kind of cleared for me. And yeah, I think it's definitely a masterpiece. It's a good one for
mm.
sure.
Of all those games, I did play the original Demon Souls when it first came out. I can't make the claim of getting all the trophies or the achievements in that, sadly, but I did I played the remake when it came out, and I did get most of my, at least played through it and beat it. But I will say that my personal uh achievement accomplishment, I always talk about Bloodborne and 100%ing Bloodborne and its DLC. That's the one Souls like that I've gotten like everything in is
Yeah,
Bloodborne.
because it's pretty grindy digging through all those chalice dungeons. And I
The
think
Chalice
the one
dungeons.
achievement is deep in the chalice dungeon, defeating the last
You have to defeat the last Chalice dungeon boss. Yeah, that one's
yeah.
rough because you
And
can't get to that boss until you do all this other random nonsense of collecting certain materials and items, and it's just like, ugh.
yeah, it's pretty deep in there. And I think for me it was getting in there in 100%. Like the only way you would 100% is if you made like a conscious effort to run through all those chalice dungeons. It was a little bit of a grind.
Yeah, the thing that helped me get through it was a buddy. We were just like, let's do it. Let's get through this together. And we did it. We were determined and we did it over the course of a couple of weeks. Where that's like we just
Cool.
grinded them out until we
Yeah.
got them all.
Yeah. Yeah, they're fun games for sure. I did a replay of Bloodborne not too long ago, actually, like maybe a few months, and I remember having so much difficulty with it when it came out,
Mm,
playing it, and I think just playing more of those types of games, it's interesting. Like I went through it a few months ago, and it was substantially easier than what I remember it. I just remember that first level in Yarnum and those mobs just having so much trouble trying to get through that. And then just, the second time just being able to move through it pretty well. It's interesting that formula that they have, they're pretty consistent with their games. And with each
mhm.
game, they've just kind of refined it more and more. And yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah, I enjoy those quite a bit.
Nice. I'm a big fan too. Real quick before we move on, I'm curious: are there any Souls likes that aren't from soft games that you like?
Yeah, so this one didn't review very well, but I like the reboot of Lords of the Fallen.
Mm,
I think the gameplay to me feels a lot like Dark Souls 1. If like Dark Souls 1 kind of from soft evolved their combat in a different direction, because it's similar to Dark Souls 1, but it seems a little bit more refined. Um, and I'm sure there people listening be like, "Oh, what is he saying?" I can't believe that. But it's just my opinion on it. I think that the Lords of the Fallen, the reboot
mhm.
is a pretty good game. There are times when I was frustrated with the combat, but overall, yeah, it was pretty cool, and the gothic environments and stuff were pretty enjoyable.
Nice. One of my personal favorites is Neo. I actually
Yeah,
really enjoy Neo.
yeah. I think I got about three-quarters of the way through Neo. And I think one of the things I had with Neo is, and same thing with God of War 2 in the combat, uh, it seems like it's like the poise
Mm,
wasn't as significant. And I rely on like the poise and feedback of getting hit in the Dark Soul, with the Soulsborne series. And it felt to me like I was just having trouble with the combat. There's a few bosses where I just got stuck on and
mm.
I just couldn't get past that because of that that poise mechanism seemed to be a little different for me. I was having a hard time with it.
Fair, especially when you get really used to like the other, like with how
Yeah.
FromSoft's formula, like you said already, it's very consistent.
Hmm. It's a Neo though. I think the story and everything was a really cool concept. I enjoyed that for sure.
I very much appreciate the combat in Neo because I'm a big Ninja Gaiden fan. So it
Mhm.
translates into Neo. It has a very similar feel in the mechanics and the way that you would pull off combos and things. And then I like the diversity of the weapons and the gear. Whereas, you know, Dark Souls and most of the FromSoft games, the gear is really restricted and you get very
Mhm.
few items, you get very few weapons. You kind of have to make do with what you get. But in Neo, you're constantly getting new gear, you're constantly getting item drops, and it's just a matter of like picking and choosing which weapons suit your playstyle, and
Mhm.
you can kind of like make the most out of those. So it's a very different take on the genre, but I enjoy the combat because I don't know, it's a different way of doing it, but still being a Souls like in that sense.
Yeah, yeah, I enjoy. Like I said, I think I got 3/4 of the way through it, and I mean it's a challenging game for
Mm.
sure. And I think there's just I can't remember the boss exactly, but there was just at some point where I was just like, okay, just need to take a break.
I had a similar experience with
Back to it.
Bloodborne where I hit a wall in Bloodborne and I had to stop, and then it took me years before I went back and actually finally beat the big spider boss. I forget his name off the top of my head, but yeah, I
Oh
got
yeah, like
stuck on him for a while.
Rom. I think like Rom,
That sounds
the
right.
Asius spider, something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I got
yeah.
stuck on him for a while, and then I finally got back to it, and I was like, "Oh, okay, it's not so bad once you kinda get it."
Know the catch or how? Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
And that's kind of the case with most of those challenging games. And I've played a fair bit of Elden Ring too, but sadly, it's one of those things where I'm like, I constantly think about Elden Ring and I wanna play it, I just don't have the time because I'm playing so much and doing so much all the time, and then I'm always thinking like, "Oh, I gotta get back to Elden Ring, I gotta get back to it." I just haven't been able to. Anyways, we talked about Souls likes for quite a bit, so I'll get us moving on to your. I want to learn a little bit more about you and your journey as being a developer, um, and how you got into where you are and the games you're working on. So to start us off, at least let's begin with like what got you into game development. Has that something been something you've always wanted to do, or is it something you turned to later in life?
Yeah, so I've always had a love for video games. I think I grew up in the generation where ever since as a little kid, video games were around. So it was always a part of the family. Parents always had a video game console, so um, just a love for them, and you know, uh, dabbled with as a youth, with a little bit of programming, but nothing that never really stuck. Always playing games, and I think the thing. So I had a buddy of mine, and just kind of the corporate grind, kind of soulless, I was an engineer by trade, and you just kind of get in a situation where you're just kind of going through the motions because you need the money, kind of thing. And me and my buddy were talking about just learning how to, game dev. And so we started looking into it a little bit and started looking at like Unreal, some of the different engines, but we kind of started gravitating towards Unreal because it just seemed like it was pretty friendly towards devs, and just from an initiation standpoint. And I think just where I was with my wife and I and a family, we were in a decent spot where just kind of like was I feel like I had enough of my soul sucked from the corporate life and just kind of took the plunge, and just started going to YouTube University and studying as many videos as I could on YouTube, and just started making games and just trying to be as serious about it as possible, try to learn as much as I can, because this is my livelihood now. So yeah, just tried to learn as much as I could. And then the first game, before I know it, about a year later, Conrad Stevenson's come out, and feel very blessed and grateful that it's as successful as it was for first game. Lots of trials and tribulations. I feel like with Conrad when it came out, I feel like my technical capabilities were kind of my limit, versus like my creative bounds where I feel like it is this time around, because I just was learning so much along the way. So there were things like when the game first came out where, I think there were some optimization issues, efficiency issues, and it's like just didn't know any better, but just trying to be as tenacious as I could and go back to YouTube University and just kind of reviewing as much as I could, eventually stumble on some solutions and make it a little better. And yeah, so I mean that's basically how kind of got started. It seems kind of crazy and a little risky and just kind of took the jump, but I feel like from an overall like life satisfaction standpoint, like much more happy and much enjoy life a lot more. And
Finding
so
things a
I
lot
think
more fulfilling now.
yeah, just having a good balance and finding that you're doing something that's bringing people joy and you're part of a community. And I yeah, I think it's a lot more rewarding to me than before. I just felt like it just wasn't really contributing to much. So yeah, it's cool for
Nice.
sure.
Are you doing game dev full time now?
Yep. Yeah. Yep. So this next game that I'm working on, Among the Whispers, is what I do full time. So trying to get neat trying to get this thing out as quickly as possible, but make sure it's as high quality as possible as well. But yeah, I work you know 10 to 12 hours probably a day on it. As
Mm,
full time job, and then yeah.
cool. As someone myself being kind of an aspiring game developer and anyone else out there listening, you said you jumped into Unreal Engine, and I'm curious, as someone like you had no previous like developing or coding experience before that.
Right, correct,
Cool.
yeah.
And so, how did you find it learning and going right into Unreal from the get go?
Yeah, so it's I mentioned I had a buddy that wanted to kind of start this with, and he eventually was just like, oh man, there's a lot here, and he kind of lost interest. And I think it's just stubborn enough, and it was something I really wanted to do that I just kept learning. So I think there are definitely some tiers of learning curves. So I was completely new to everything. I didn't know anything. So when I first went into it, just kind of was researching some of the different engines. Like I know like Unity is real popular for indie devs, and Unreal, but just kind of looking at where they're positioned in the market and the overall like startup costs, and if you had to game and how much, it seemed like Unreal just had a pretty good deal where like you didn't have to pay royalties on your game unless it total revenue was over 1 million times. So and it seemed like Unity had other costs that were seemed like it would be more impactful to me, and I was like, well, I really doubt my first game's going to make that much money, so it felt like pretty safe. And then the other thing too with Unreal, having the blueprint interface, I'm a visual learner, and it really just connected well with me. And I could think through things, and it worked well. There were some things that I read early on that was like, eventually you'll run into a problem where you'll have to know like C++ and all this, like, to kind of code. But between the two games, I think like I've never ran into a problem that I couldn't solve with blueprinting. So I think their blueprint's pretty robust. Handles a lot of things, and I'm sure somebody's listening that was collegiately educated with this stuff, is probably like here like nails on a chalkboard. And I'm sure there's some things that I don't know, because if I don't know to look at it, I'm going to be ignorant of it because I don't have the train with it. But yeah, everything that any problem I've ran across, has been able to work it out with blueprints.
So you've been able
So
to avoid learning coding for the most part.
yeah, the only thing that I've had to kind of really look at any kind of coding was when Conrad Stevenson's putting it up on the Unreal or the Epic store. They had a little bit of coding that had to do there, but I was able to just kind of copy and paste some things, and then just fill in some blanks to get that uploaded, and that wasn't really too difficult. So that's more like just the interface of your achievements and stuff on the Epic store, but the actual game code itself was all blueprints.
Interesting.
um
Yeah, it's definitely
yep.
interesting to learn because that's like one of the things that I see it, and I'm assuming most people go through like the dauntingness of learning coding, and then you got other engines that have like the visual mediums like Game Maker, and I think Godot has a little bit of that too, but it's a bit in a rough state. Yeah, so it's interesting to learn that Unreal is a little bit more friendly for folks who don't know coding going into it, and I'm gonna look into that myself even.
Yeah, I would say for me, I think there was some distinct like plateaus or like pillars or kind of overcoming that learning. But yeah, with it all being visual and blueprints, it makes it a lot easier for me. And this sounds very basic, but just understanding like the basic variables that Unreal uses like was a big hurdle. And then the next thing was like referencing, the different components you wanted to talk to in between the game. And I think once you got those two things really understood, then I felt like things started really clicking for me. And then it was more like, my imagination started to be my limiting factor, not so much my technical skills. So, and I feel like that visual interface with Unreal made it real easy to do that for me because of my learning style. I think I'm such a visual learner.
Yeah, and it's going to be different for everyone.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
Mm. Yeah, that's very interesting, and I'm gonna try to tie that into where you've gone now with Conrad Stevenson's, and now you're working on Among the Whispers, correct?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. So, but that both of these games are kind of deeply rooted in paranormal like investigation,
Yep. Yeah.
and we've talked before, and you mentioned that you have like a passion about the like TV shows about ghost hunting.
Yeah.
So I was
Yep.
going to throw that to you to talk a little bit more about your inspirations that you take when you do design games, even though you said yourself you're not typically like a big horror fan, but you're making kind of like a horror-esque kind of game.
Yeah. So I absolutely love just any kind of paranormal show. And it's kind of interesting. I don't know. I guess some folks can kind of get snickers at this, but for me, it's like watching WWE, you know, and like for me, I feel like, you watch wrestling, like they're great athletes, it's fake,
Yeah.
but it's just so fun to watch. And so I don't know if that's fair. I think, there's so many ghost stories over hundreds of years. There's probably some truth to it, but I think most of the stuff that you see on TV and the YouTube stuff, like, it's just people trying to get views and stuff. But it's really entertaining. I like the setup. I like how they use the tools, and they, some of the newer ones like my oldest, she likes to watch like Sam and Colby, and I sit and watch the stuff with her, and it's just fun. I just really like the environment and the take on it. For me, I think it first started really kind of captivating to this when Ghost Hunters came out on the Sci-Fi Channel in like the early 2000s, and I wouldn't miss an episode. Like whenever it'd come on live, I'd sit down and watch it, and that was awesome. And I think at the time there, 20 years ago, maybe a little more naive. Like I was really like, oh, there's ghosts. Like, it sold me.
Get all sucked
And
into it.
yeah. And then as, a few more episodes pass and time go on, I kind of, but it just still like, I think those original Ghost Hunters series like kind of captivated me. And then to this day, just still have that love for the paranormal. And I think, going back to why I'm, making these games is, I do love the Soulsborne games, and we talked a lot about that, but I really do enjoy, like in my free time, if I'm watching TV, I'm usually watching something related to Ghost, and, and I enjoy the gaming. So it's like, I wanted to play a game that kind of made me feel like, I was in those shows. And, I know there's some really successful games out there that, are paranormal ghost investigation games, and but for me it just didn't kind of hit the same way as when I watched those shows. And so I just wanted to try to create something that made me feel that same way when I was playing them, so try to create you know a ghost game where the ghost wasn't so predictable or had predictable, so I could still enjoy it, so I could still kind of get that feel and try to figure some of that out. And I look back, Conrad, it's far from perfect. I know there's things like if I had to remake it, I'd probably do things a little different, but that's really, I think, where I wanted, these games to go. And I think this time around with Among the Whispers, I feel a lot more excited about this, because it's my creativity that's the limitation for this time versus my technical. So a lot of these where I felt like maybe Conrad was lacking, I feel like I was able to fill in those areas a little better and make the gameplay experience for Among the Whispers much better and much more rounded out, more exciting, and kind of hit that sensation or feeling you get from when I would watch those TV shows a little better than what I did for
Mhm.
Conrad.
Yeah, and I want to speak on that as far as I've played a bit of your game so far with Conrad Stevenson's, and I immediately picked up on what you're talking about, the feeling you get playing your game versus some of the more popular ones out there, and the sense of, oh, okay, yeah, this definitely feels a little bit more like when you're watching one of those shows, because when you're watching the shows, you get that realization of like, okay, this is probably fake for the most part, like, whether you believe in ghosts or not, but at the same time, these are TV shows meant to pull in audiences and get ratings. So they probably do a lot of extra fluffing going on there. But then again, ultimately those shows always end with something of like, we didn't find the ghost, but we saw some spooky shit, and we don't know what's going on, and it always leaves it with a question open. Whereas some of the more popular paranormal games, it's more just hunt the ghost, live or die. It's a little bit more wham bam, thank you, ma'am. But your game has a little bit more dynamic to it, and it's got a lot more lore, and it's got a lot more history, and that to me speaks to the influence of the shows, because in the shows they always do that. They deep dive on the location. They talk about the people that live there, like crimes that happened, like, oh, there's people that died here, they were murdered, and this is why their ghosts might be here. And there's so much more involvement in that respect. And I picked up on that playing your game, that it's much more rooted in that experience.
Yeah. So Among the Whispers and Conrad Stevenson's Paranormal PI has kind of two different approaches, but it's still fundamentally the same. That to get a ghost, you had to have a person there, and to have that person turn into a ghost, like just like in all those TV shows, like something tragic had to happen. Um, so then, again, the formula. I feel. I really like the formula that I'm going in this new game with Among the Whispers, but it's kind of given the player the opportunity to, you go into a location, you're going to be spooked and unsettled and eerie things, but then you get the opportunity to kind of find these things that give you insight into this person's life and learn who they are and what happened here and kind of what got them to this point, and then ultimately release them from the place. So you give them kind of closure. And I think that releasing process, I think helps the player kind of develop that, like kind of that humanistic, almost emotional approach where you've kind of, you know, grinded a little bit to get to know this ghost from getting the evidence, the information. And sometimes it can feel kind of, it's a lot of work to get there. And then when you go through that releasing process, and Conrad, understands that they were people and tries to be kind with it, it creates that emotional attachment there. So yeah, definitely trying. I think how I'm wanting to communicate this moving forward, is that it's authentic real life paranormal simulation investigator kind of thing, So um it's it's trying to take as authentic approach as possible to what we've seen on TV and the YouTube videos and media. But knowing that, in my mind, it's kind of a little bit like the WWE. So
It also sounds like it's not so much taking an approach that focuses on trying to scare the player as it is to give the player more of an experience that relates to the paranormal. Whereas, it's not just jump scares, or it's not just, go in the spooky house and wait for something to come at you.
yeah, so I think my approach on that is I think, or I feel when I play, when I've seen and played some of these games that have jump scares, I feel like you get somewhat immune to them a little bit. And I think
100%.
that can only work so much. So
Mhm.
one thing that I tried to do in Conrad and then Among the Whispers, I feel like I've been able to do it better because it's my second game, is just to try to create an unnerving, eerie environment that kind of just keeps you on your toes. So like if you create something that you're like, it's suspenseful, you're like, oh, something gonna happen more, and then when those things happen, although, if it's an audio or an apparition, like it's a function. So, like, if the ghost shows up and it's like grabbing at its neck and it's, doing something, you're like, it might be scary, but it's trying to tell you something. It's like it's grabbing at its neck because it's like reliving that it was maybe strangled in its past and it's trying to communicate with you. So, it's more than just like a jump scare. It's like it's very uneasy and it's unnerving when you see it, but it's providing meaning. The same thing with the voice lines when it's telling you something, you hear it whispered in your ear and you jump, but if you go back on your recorder and listen to it, it's trying to tell you something like, maybe it was shot or something. You hear it,
Those are always
and
some of like the spookiest parts of those shows when they do voice recordings, but they talk, you don't hear anything, but then they play back the recording and you're listening like really intensely and they ask you a question like, who are you? And then you hear the voice like, and you're like, something spoke, and like this, that like, moment.
yeah, for sure. And I tried my best with some of that to emulate that. Yeah, I really enjoy this. So, like in Conrad, in the EVP sessions, you get kind of like this delayed pause before the voice line goes, and yeah, I do appreciate those moments for sure because yeah, they are some of the most spookiest ones for sure.
Hmm.
I do think with Among the Whispers, I am exploring to have some more ghost interactions, where there may be a stronger approach to trying to scare the player. Not so much like jump scares, but I do want to explore trying to increase the bar a little bit for a spooky environment. But I definitely don't want the game to turn into like a ghost fun house. Definitely want to keep it on that, try to make it as authentic as possible, as real life paranormal investigation simulator.
And then the end game there is always going to be to try to release the spirit and help them move on.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And so how, you'd be evaluated with experience and achievements and things like that. It's yes, how many of particular types of spirits that you would release, what types of spirits you release. Yeah. And then in Among the Whispers, they have, there's an archive system, again, where you get to learn about the family and the history and what kind of dark past these rich folks had all living in the mansion. And then how some of those artifacts, archives are, start to be exposed or related to the ghosts that you release also. So, yep, the releasing is a key mechanic for success in progressing through the game.
I'm curious if there was any specific inspiration for having a mechanic like that as opposed to just, yep, there's a ghost in that house and mission accomplished,
Yeah, and I think, again, just going back to when watching some of these shows with ghost hunters and ghost adventures, it seems like sometimes they just go in and are spooked, but it seemed like the ones when they could identify, like, maybe they didn't necessarily release the spirit, but they would say like, hey, we think from these EVPs we got and this, it sounds like this is probably the spirit that's dealing with your house. And it just like would kind of bring like closure to the family. And from ghost hunters, Jason Grant, they'd be like, you don't think they're hurting you or anything. They're just kind of and if you need anything, we're only a phone call away, was kind of one of their things. And so I think that that part, like, they're always trying to help families, and trying to give them as much information as possible. So I think just from a video game standpoint, just kind of move in that direction. I think the release would be is kind of my artistic and interpretation of that, just setting the family's mind at ease, being able to alleviate the ghosts and the property. So
It kind of makes me think of a couple of other things where like Cana, Bridge of Spirits, because like in that game there was a point of when you like would defeat evil spirits, you would kind of like release their soul and they would be able to be free because they usually get like sucked up into some sort of monstrosity because of something terrible that happened to them. And then as soon as you like defeat them, it puts their soul at ease and they're able to like move on. Or in Demon Slayer, they always had it where whenever they defeated one of the big bad monsters, there was always this like flashback to what happened to them when they were human before they turned into a monster, and then they start to like, oh, I'm free now, and they can move on essentially. So it kind of gives me that similar approach, and it's a little bit more like heartwarming to kind of give this uh, backstory and character to these things or monstrosities or ghosts or whichever situation you're looking at, and it's you start to have that more of an inner reflection of, okay, this was just a person once upon a time before they became this. And I think that helps connect the viewer, the reader, the player, in a much more dynamic fashion.
I agree. And I think, some of those references I mentioned, I probably, just through seeing kind of the same media, I got a kiddo that's really into Demon Slayer, so I think probably just subconsciously seeing some of those things, probably is just like, hey, that's kind of a neat. So I'm sure I've been influenced by some of those other
Mm,
medias and just kind of a culmination of all these things. Um, just kind of develop the process into to what it turned out to be. Because the releasing processes between the two games are fairly similar. Um, Although I do have kind of a different approach, and Among the Whispers, it's a little more technical with gadgetry, where I think in Conrad it's a little more seems a little more of a spiritual type process in Conrad.
mm. Was that a limitation due to your technical abilities, or just that's different approach to how you
Well,
actually
so
structure the
yeah, I
game?
actually kind of want to, as I'm moving forward. So, Among the Whispers, I'd like to create, a few different games in this series. So, one of the things, if you notice as you play Among the Whispers, and Stephanie, who's the protagonist in her backpack, she's got, like the EMF reader, the REM pod, the temp gauge. All these things are kind of all techie related, but there's another element of ghost hunting that's all like on the spiritual medium side, where it's like you're sensing, feeling, maybe using Ouija boards and different things. And so Steph, when she releases, she uses like this Jacob ladder, which is like this electronic device. Where I think on the spiritual side, you'd be using different type of smudge sticks and things like that to kind of help smudge those spirits into the afterlife. So I'd like to kind of explore, as these games go on, maybe different methods, and to ultimately kind of end up where maybe players have a choice on how they want to investigate. Whether more technical and more spiritual, and kind of let them play almost where, like, hey, players sometimes like to be a sword swinger, sometimes they like to be a magic wielder, so
I was just gonna
kind
say,
of.
it sounds like you'd be getting to the point where you can have like custom characters and people can make their own personalized like paranormal investigator with different skill sets.
Yeah, and I think that's, down the road or whatever. But Among the Whispers here, is more focused, uh, on the technical side, and really try to refine the gameplay on this before I would, kind of go into that direction. But yeah, so I would, I kind of got the next handful of games in mind, what I'd like to do. But I think the success on the current depends on, the availability of the future kind of thing. So.
Mm. Is there anything you can tell our listeners about Among the Whispers that you haven't shared before, or give us some expectations of when we might expect the game?
Um, so I'm apprehensive right now to say a date on when it would be ready, just because uh, if I say a date, it's very important to me that I hit it. I don't want to push anything back. I do feel comfortable, like, in the first half of 2025. I think it'd be purchasable. I'm hoping, I can do something like first quarter, but in the first half, we'll see how it goes. I think all the major game elements are in it currently on the build that I have for the Patreon supporters. Now the public beta is obsolete at this point. But yeah, so for the Patreon members, all the major game elements are in it. And so yeah, I feel at this point it's just kind of refining those elements to get in, but I want to make sure I got enough time to get it to where it's a really fun, enjoyable experience for folks.
Nice. So
Um,
we can expect it relatively soon. I appreciate and can totally understand not having like a set date, especially because difficulties happen, technical difficulties, especially, being an independent developer, there's going to be things that you have to fine tune or tweak, or you think you got everything. And then you look back and like, oh no, I missed this, or I got to fix that. And at least you have some ability to get feedback and, make some changes before you finally release it. So no problem whatsoever not giving us a date. I understand that entirely, but at least just like kind of giving some people some expectations of like, oh, okay, sometime next year we can look forward to checking this out. But otherwise, they can check out your other game, Conrad Stevenson's Paranormal PI, right now.
yep. Yep. Yeah. That's available on Steam, and we're going to be participating here. I think Steam has a winter sale coming up, so
Mm.
be a good time, to check that out. So, but yeah, no, I appreciate the about the date here. As soon as get more done, I'll try to zero in on that, and I'll let everybody know as soon as I can if things start getting
Oh, good. Oh, good. I understand that.
variables. Yeah, we've
I
got
wanted
it.
to at least ask you too about in your journey, whether it's game development or on either of the games, Conrad Stevenson's or now Among the Whispers, what would you say is one of the greatest challenges that you've faced and overcome?
Yeah, I think for me, it's just uh, a lot of just not knowing things. Like I
Mm,
said, I went to like YouTube University on stuff, so I get kind of a vision in my head of what I want to do, but then it's just kind of difficult to cipher through how how best to do it. Um, so I think a problem that came to mind was like when I was developing Conrad, and there was a point when I developed the audio player. So like when you captured audio evidence, you could go back to the office and replay the audios you captured, and slow them down, speed them up, and get a better idea of what they're trying to say. Um, one of the streamers, I think his Ensign streamed it, and he was like, "Hey, it'd be cool if you could do this." It's like, yeah, I agree, but like in my head, I was like, I have no idea I'm doing. So, I did a lot of research on YouTube, and there just wasn't anything that really would point me in the direction what I need to do, because I already had my code written on how I was obtaining the audio and collecting them and saving them in player. So it's like, how would I take this code I already had and then try to find some solution to turn it into this player, and end up just being like probably watched 100 if not 1,000 different YouTube videos on just what type of variables I was using in the code and how to handle those things and how to deal with them, and then just kind of taking a bunch of notes, and then eventually I was able to kind of think through with all this different research and just put that code together and make it. And that was a big, I think, turning point for me in a confidence boost that I was able to just code this stuff on, like, hey, I could do this, maybe just need to research some things, maybe not necessarily everything spelled out, but I felt the confidence like, hey, I'm smart enough to kind of piece these things together and get it, and it then ended up working, and that was a pretty cool experience, because when I walked into it, it was a very difficult, challenging, had no idea how I was going to do it, and then looking at resources and things like that, like I said, YouTube University, it was pretty bleak when I first started, but I think just through tenacity and not giving up, I was able to think through it, and I was pretty proud with how it turned out.
nice. That's cool. I appreciate that, especially when I've been there myself, where you start going to the YouTube looking for answers to questions, and there's never a specific, this is the exact answer you're looking for. And you try to like dig and research to try to find it. And then, like you, I've done that before with some problems where you kind of like take bits and pieces of what you've heard or read or learned, and then you kind of like find some solution based on different pieces that you put together. So, very cool.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely a big confidence booster. I guess, anybody that's listening that's kind of an aspiring game dev, that wants to get into it and has passion for a project and want to start it. I mean, there's been several times where somebody on my Discord's come to me with a bug and like my stomach drops out. And I'm just like, oh no, what am I going to do? And then when I look on YouTube, I spend an hour looking on YouTube and nothing's clear. And it's just kind of the same thing. But I think it's, if you're able to just kind of stick with it and solve one of those problems, you just have enough of those, you start getting enough confidence to where it's like, hey, I don't know the answer now, but I know that if I work hard enough at it, like I will get it, and it'll be fine. And so yeah, I definitely didn't have all the answers, and making these games were or have been pretty challenging for me, but you just stick with it and you get it and everything turns out.
Nice. Yeah, that makes me think about did you have any other like developer contacts or friends that you could message and ask for help on anything like that?
Uh, there was just a few acquaintances that I've kind of interacted with since starting this game journey. That's like joined the Discord and have some programming experience or what, and been able to just bounce some things off them. Um, yeah, a few friends. Got one friend that's a programmer, um, and I'll chat with him a little bit on stuff, but he's a coder, so he like knows the details of like the coding stuff. And sometimes it's difficult to chat with him because I don't know that. So some of our discussions just end up being like overall arching like strategies, like what's good strategy, and that's relatable and that's
Mm,
helpful. But yeah, so I guess to answer that without rambling too much, I think before this journey, I really didn't have too many acquaintances, if any, but folks have joined the Discord along the way, have, volunteered to help. And, sir, if they found a bug, they're like, hey, I can help if you want. And, you know, no problem reaching out for help if I need it. So, yeah,
mhm.
it's been, yeah, kind of help. I think the big thing that's been helpful with that is, again, just trying to understand overall arching code, like best practices and organization and things like that, to ensure things are as efficient as possible with it. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and that's something. Speaking from the Fearzine side of things, that's something that we've been actually very excited about with building our community, and we've got a lot of developers joining our Discord and following us, and it makes us really excited when we see new developers getting into our Discord and communicating. And we would love to foster a space for that where developers can work with each other, talk to each other, help each other out. So that just me throwing out there kind of like a shameless plug at this moment of like, hey, we have a Discord where developers can hang out and talk to each other and help each other with things. So yeah, check that out.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. And I probably should be a little more active in that, because I do think in the beginning, uh, for me too, just having somebody that just could chat with would be really helpful. Because
Hmm.
again, like I mentioned, I mentioned this so many times, like YouTube University. I mean, you're just kind of stuck by what you don't know, and until somebody tells you, hey, you can do this, then like all of a sudden those clouds clear. But until somebody does that, you're kind of in the dark with things. So
Yeah, big secret. This podcast is a little selfish of me because I'm going to utilize all this knowledge I'm gaining from you developers that I talk to, and I'm going to start using it so I can develop games.
yeah, that's awesome though. I think if I can help anybody out, and if any of my my trials and tribulations and struggles, I'd be able to help anybody, that's super cool. And I appreciate that. So yeah, no
Cool.
problem. I'm always able to lend a hand. I guess anybody listen that's part of that, your Discord there, feel free to reach out if you have any questions for me too. Because yeah, I would no problem helping anybody out that I can.
And of course, you've got a Discord as well, so people can
Yep.
always go that
Yeah.
way as
Yeah.
well.
Absolutely. Yep.
Hmm. And I'll include links to everything in our show notes for the podcast, including that link for your Discord that you shared with me. Random question. I thought about this a minute ago, and it's coming back to me. I'm curious, how long did it take you to develop Conrad Stevenson's from like start to finish? If you can
Um.
answer it.
Yeah. So to get it to where I started playing around with Unreal to where it was in early access about 6 months. And then to where I released it, it was probably like another year and a half later. And so if the folks listening were like, OG fans of Conrad when it first was released, in my opinion, it was hardly a game. It was more just kind of like a little ghost sim thing that didn't have a lot. So it evolved a lot from when it was first released. Um, so I think, to say from start to finish, it probably was more like a couple years, but I released it in early access probably way earlier than I should have. And I'm very grateful that there was enough support in the community. It was such a cool community, everything, because it really helped pave the way for me to start making the second project, and hopefully the fans like it just as much. And I'm hesitant, I don't want to do the early access Among the Whispers. I'd like to do a more traditional release with it, and hopefully that's a little more impactful for all the fans when they see it and they get it one time, that are all able to play it, a finished product. Because I think when you play it on early access, especially when it's underdeveloped like that, there are some people that played a little bit, was like, this isn't for me,
It's a
and
double-edged sword.
yeah. And then it changed so much that, some of the reviews, actually, I just read a review for Conrad like yesterday. And, it was like, oh, I played this, when it first started, and set it, away. And then they left a really positive review. But yeah, it was like a year later in the game, they just haven't, they didn't play it. So yeah, I want to try to give the best impression possible. So yeah, if they're played the beta or they played the alpha, you go to my Discord, you can download a key and play, and appreciate any of the feedback you can give, because yeah, just it's a game for everybody, who want to experience the authentic, paranormal simulator. I'll try to incorporate the feedback the best I can with it.
Feedback is always good.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
Whether the feedback itself is good or bad, feedback is always good.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, sometimes, even if it stings a little bit, you gotta like maybe walk away from it for a few days or so and come back to it, and it's like, okay, what are they really trying to say? Because obviously, if they took the time to write it, they care about it enough to say something. Even if it's, sometimes if it's like the most trolliest thing you can think of, and just like, oh man, but come back later, it's like, okay, it bothered them enough to write it. So what can I get out of this? Like, what am I? Sometimes it might be a small, deviation of project. Sometimes it's, a big deviation of project. But yeah, I try to respect everybody's time who took the time to write something. And definitely the nicer feedback's easier to follow. But yeah, I agree it all. Appreciate it all.
Yeah, and anyone doesn't grow without proper feedback. Because if people are just saying it's great, nothing wrong with it, no notes, like, you can be like, I know it's not perfect, so it's, what are you not telling me? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I even just back when I was in the corporate world, I just had this expression, like, whenever working on teams, like, if I'm the smartest one here, we're all in trouble, so kind of take that approach, like, if I'm the smartest one here, we're all in trouble. And I'm new to this, so there's no way my product's going to be good and perfect. I'm still learning everything. So yeah, I desperately need the feedback as possible, and fine tune things. And
I can relate to that, especially with the whole Fearzine project and it being relatively new for myself. And it's like, I'm always open to feedback. I'm open to feedback on this podcast. If you're listening, please leave a review and tell us what you think. Tell us what's good, what could be better. I'll take it, and I'll take it to heart and change how we do things and try to make it as best as we can, especially for our developer listeners, developer friends, our guests. I want to make this podcast service our audiences, whether it's the listener and or the developers or the guests that we have on the show, as much as possible. So feedback is good.
Awesome. Yeah, really appreciate you chatting with me and taking time to chat.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I do have one other thought that I was going to ask you before we close it out
yeah,
here.
absolutely. Yeah.
You did this game, sounds like pretty quickly. Like, if you're giving it like a maybe 2 years between like you learning Unreal to like releasing it in early access, that sounds fast to me. Like, that sounds pretty quick, especially because it's such a at least in my eyes, like it's a large game for a first game.
Mhm.
And I'm assuming you didn't have anything else. Like you didn't. Did you do any other like tester projects? Was there any other smaller games that you worked on or tried to do before then?
No, I mean, I had like different test files where I was testing things out. And so when I first started this, there was like a few projects that I was maybe kind of like spitballing, was I was trying to learn. Um, and they were kind of, I was going at them like simultaneously, but I mean, I think when the project that Conrad was on my computer, I think it was called like Ghost Getter, like that was just the name of the file is
Ghost
Ghost Getter.
Facers.
Yeah. And it was like, that's what it was until basically, I think even like the first file I loaded up on Steam might have even still been Ghost Getter until I like changed it, officially a little longer. So yeah, it was just um I'd kind of tinker with this, and then I had a few other files that I would test because what would happen, unfortunately, is I didn't know enough about the engine. There's a few times where I do something code wise, and I would essentially like break the game because I was ignorant of how to repair it, and so I'd have to like redo my backup and stuff. So I had a few different copies, and I would tinker with code, and then once I got it figured out, I'd put it in the main game. But yeah, no, this was pretty much my first project.
That's very inspiring for someone like myself and anyone else I would imagine out there that might listen to this that is either looking at getting into game development or just getting started. To think that you picked up Unreal Engine, you started messing with it, you started learning through YouTube and other various sources, and a few years later you've spit out a game and a pretty good one, and people are
I
pretty
appreciate
positive
that.
about it.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I definitely need to play a little bit more of it myself, and we're going to be looking at covering Conrad Stevenson's in a future issue with the
Cool.
magazine,
Yeah, I
and
appreciate
we
that.
look forward to checking out Among the Whispers when that comes time. But yeah, this has
Awesome.
been awesome and an excellent chat. And before I close it out, I wanted to give you one last chance to. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk out about before we close it out?
Yeah, just haven't really talked too much about Among the Whispers.
Yeah.
So yeah, just kind of little spiel on that. If there's folks listening that's played Conrad and enjoyed it, definitely want you to check it out. If you have played Conrad and maybe you're like, it's a little slow, I definitely encourage you to check out Among the Whispers because there's a few things that I feel like I was able to develop a little better and actually just add new additions to it. So Among the Whispers, one of the big things is Among the Whispers provocation. So there's mechanisms where you can actively communicate and try to provoke the ghost as in a friendly Conrad way as possible, respectful way because they were people, but ways to get them to interact with you. So you're always busy, and while you're using provocations, you have different meters, a focus meter and a nerve meter that you've kind of got to balance with it. So it does become a little gamey, but it's a way to kind of balance the ghost interactions with you and how you're provoking them. So it's a system where you're constantly busy and moving, makes it a little more action packed. So yeah, I'm excited about how that goes. The other thing too with Among the Whispers is that the ghosts themselves and their stories and how they died are procedurally generated.
Hmm.
So each time you play, the investigations are different, although they're scripted. So the way that they passed and all that does tie into the overarching story of the mansion. So as you go through and find those archive pieces, you'll be able to piece the story together. But there's this sense, I feel like it enhances the replayability a little more because you never know what kind of ghost and spirit you're going to run into or where they're haunting. So I think those elements there for, it adds a little bit more flair and excitement from Conrad. So I'm excited to hear, what maybe new players, old players would think about that. So yeah, I appreciate you giving me a few minutes to chat about that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to make sure that you're telling people about what you're working on, making sure that we're providing the platform here for you to share about your games. Again, like I said, this is kind of like a work in progress ourselves, and we're gonna iterate and do what we can to make this a service for our listeners, and as well as our guests on the show. So making sure we're doing what we can, and I'm happy to provide that for you guys and you as well, Kip. So thank you very much for telling us about your game and your experience and your background. Again, I want to say how much I appreciate as a newcomer to game development, and I'm in the process of early learning myself. That hearing that someone like you was able to, just say, "Hey, I feel like I'm gonna try and do some game development," and you got into it and you started learning. Because I'm in that same stage myself now, where I just decided I'm gonna start learning some game design and development and trying to figure it out. So you are like the light at the end of the tunnel for myself right now, and hopefully anyone else out there listening.
Yeah, it's really humbling to hear that. I really appreciate it. Thanks for chatting with me, Dan. If you have, any questions or anything, I'd love to answer them for you. Just it's cool chatting with you. I appreciate it. Again,
Awesome.
like starting off like just a dude trying to make games. So it's so cool to hear some of the stuff. So really appreciate it. And yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for all the support from the fans community. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again. I love this. I love communicating. I love chatting with people about games. I love learning about the process. I love talking in this regard. So I'm really excited to finally be doing a podcast in this sense and being able to get to know you guys, the developers, the anyone in the community that we're going to try to bring on and do this show. And I love doing this, and so it makes me happy to know that people can come on and enjoy hanging out and chatting with me. And I'd love to have you back as a guest again in the future and have more
Yeah, sounds
conversations.
good. Yeah, cool.
All right, awesome. Well, to just close us out, then I'm going to say thank you for being on the show with me, Kip, and sharing everything again. I know I've already said this, and I'm getting a little redundant, but I am very appreciative, and I can't help it. And then thank you for listening to the show. This is Building Horror, a Fearzine podcast from Fearzine Magazine. A little bit of self promo here. Fearzine Magazine is a new independent gaming magazine that's dedicated about horror video games, horror adjacent video games, and just all things nostalgia that relate to that and the experience of playing those games, especially the older games. And we highlight and spotlight independent developers as well as talk about games of our past, classic games that we love, and just anything and everything that relates to the genre. So this is our new show that we're trying out, and I'm really excited to be getting into this journey. Thank you, Kip, for helping me get it started, and thank you everyone for listening. We'll catch you guys next time.
Fearzine.